Mike Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow as he pushed his mop across the gleaming floor of Tech Innovate Inc.'s main lobby. The early morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the space. He glanced up at the towering digital clock on the wall, 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the daily stampede of employees would begin. As if on cue, the elevator doors slid open with a soft ding. Mike's shoulders tensed. He knew who it was without looking up. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident fossil," a voice boomed across the lobby. "Still haven't figured out how to use a Roomba, old man?" Mike gritted his teeth but kept his eyes on his work. "Good morning, Mr. Stevenson," he said evenly. Blake Stevenson, CEO of Tech Innovate and self-proclaimed tech visionary, strode across the freshly mopped floor, leaving a trail of muddy footprints in his wake. He paused in front of Mike, his expensive Italian loafers inches from the mop. "You missed a spot," Blake said with a smirk, deliberately scuffing his shoe on the floor. Mike bit back a retort. At 50, he was far from old, but in the youth-obsessed world of tech, he might as well have been ancient. He watched as Blake sauntered towards his office, leaving a mess for Mike to clean up again. As he re-rinsed his mop, Mike's mind wandered to a time when he wore a suit instead of a janitor's uniform. He'd been an accomplished mechanical engineer once, with patents and accolades to his name. But that was before the layoffs, before the economy tanked, before he had to swallow his pride and take any job he could find to keep a roof over his family's head. The lobby began to fill with employees, their chatter and the clacking of keyboards filling the air. Mike worked quietly, invisible to most. He'd learned to tune out the conversations around him, but one caught his attention. "Did you hear? The new cooling system for the data centers is having issues," a young programmer whispered to her colleague. "Blake's furious. If we don't fix it soon, we could lose millions." Mike's ears perked up. Cooling systems were his specialty, or at least they used to be. He shook his head, reminding himself that those days were behind him. He was just the janitor now. The morning wore on, and Mike made his way through the building, cleaning and observing. He couldn't help but notice the tension in the air, especially around the main laboratory. Through the glass walls, he could see a group of engineers huddled around a large prototype, gesticulating wildly. As he cleaned the nearby break room, Mike overheard more snippets of conversation. "The efficiency ratings are way off," one engineer said, running his hands through his hair. "We're burning through power like crazy. If we don't fix this before the investor demo next week, we're toast," another added. Mike's fingers itched to grab a pencil, to sketch out the solutions forming in his mind. But he pushed the urge down. It wasn't his place. He was just there to clean up messes, not solve them. Later that afternoon, as Mike was emptying trash bins in the lab, he couldn't help but study the prototype. It was an impressive piece of machinery, sleek, modern, and clearly designed for maximum output. But even from a distance, he could see the fatal flaw in its design. The cooling fins were angled incorrectly, creating a vortex that trapped hot air instead of dispersing it. A simple adjustment could increase efficiency by at least 30%, maybe more. Mike's mind raced with calculations and potential solutions. "Hey, Grandpa, this isn't nap time," Blake's voice cut through Mike's thoughts. The CEO stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I don't pay you to stand around and gawk at things you don't understand." Mike felt a flash of anger. He understood more than Blake could imagine. But he swallowed his pride and mumbled an apology, quickly gathering the trash and heading for the door. As he passed Blake, Mike hesitated. He could see the stress lines on the younger man's face, the worry behind his arrogant facade. For a moment, Mike considered speaking up, offering his insights. But then Blake's lip curled in that familiar sneer, and the moment passed. "Make sure you actually clean something next time," Blake called after him. Mike spent the rest of the day battling with himself. Every fiber of his being wanted to help, to prove his worth. But years of humiliation and dismissal had taken their toll. Who would believe the janitor had the solution to their multi-million-dollar problem? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the office, Mike made his final rounds. The building was nearly empty, save for a few dedicated or desperate souls burning the midnight oil. He passed by Blake's office and paused, surprised to see the CEO still at his desk, head in his hands. Mike's hand hovered over the door handle. He could walk away, go home to his family, and leave the problems of Tech Innovate behind. It wasn't his responsibility. He was just the janitor, after all. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. Despite everything, Mike still took pride in his work, all of his work. He couldn't walk away from a problem he knew he could solve. Taking a deep breath, Mike knocked on the door. Blake looked up, his face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What is it? Come to tell me you're finally retiring." Mike steeled himself. "Mr. Stevenson, I couldn't help but notice the issues with the new cooling system prototype. I think I might have a solution." Blake's eyes narrowed. "You? What could you possibly know about our technology?" "I used to be a mechanical engineer," Mike said quietly. "I specialized in thermal management systems." Blake leaned back in his chair, a look of disbelief on his face. "You expect me to believe that? Why would an engineer be working as a janitor?" Mike's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but he pressed on. "Life doesn't always go as planned, sir. But I know I can help. Just give me 5 minutes to explain my idea." Blake stared at him for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, 5 minutes. But this better not be a waste of my time." Mike nodded, gratitude and nervousness battling in his stomach. He grabbed a marker and moved to the whiteboard in Blake's office. "The problem is in the cooling fin design," he began, his hand moving confidently across the board. "If we adjust the angle here and here, we can create a more efficient airflow pattern." As Mike spoke, his confidence grew. The years fell away, and he was once again the brilliant engineer he'd always been. He drew diagrams, spouted calculations, and outlined potential improvements with the ease of a seasoned professional. When he finally stopped talking, he turned to find Blake staring at him with a mixture of shock and grudging respect. "That's actually brilliant," Blake admitted. "How did you... why didn't you say something sooner?" Mike's smile was tinged with sadness. "Would you have listened?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Blake had the grace to look ashamed. "Mr. Thompson," Blake said, using Mike's name for the first time, "I think we need to have a longer conversation. But first, I need you to come with me to the lab. We have a prototype to fix." As they walked towards the lab, an unlikely pair united by circumstance and shared purpose, neither man could have predicted the series of events their late-night encounter would set in motion. The journey ahead would challenge everything they thought they knew about each other, themselves, and the true nature of success. Blake pushed open the lab door, gesturing for Mike to enter. "After you, Mr. Thompson. Let's see if your theory holds up in practice." Mike stepped into the lab, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As the door closed behind them, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of a new chapter, or just another fleeting moment in a life full of disappointments? Blake leaned against the lab bench, arms crossed. "All right, Thompson, you've got my attention. Now show me what you can really do." Mike nodded, rolling up his sleeves as he approached the prototype. "First, we'll need to power it down and..." As Mike began to work, explaining each step with the clarity of a seasoned professor, Blake found himself hanging on every word. The CEO's skepticism slowly gave way to genuine interest, then outright amazement. Hours ticked by unnoticed as the unlikely pair worked side by side. Mike's hands moved with practiced ease, making adjustments that seemed minor but promised major improvements. Blake, for his part, found himself fetching tools and taking notes, roles he hadn't played since his early days as a startup founder. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the lab windows, Mike stepped back from the prototype. "That should do it," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Want to fire it up?" Blake nodded, a mix of excitement and trepidation on his face. He pressed the power button and the machine hummed to life. They waited in tense silence as the system ran through its startup sequence. Suddenly, the computer monitor lit up with a stream of data. Blake's eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. This can't be right," he muttered. Mike peered over his shoulder, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What's wrong?" Wrong? Nothing's wrong, that's just it. Blake turned to Mike, his face a mask of disbelief. These efficiency ratings, they're off the charts. We're seeing a 40% improvement across the board. How is this possible? Mike shrugged, trying to downplay his accomplishment. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. The principles of thermodynamics don't change no matter how advanced the technology gets. Blake shook his head, laughing in amazement. Simple? You just saved this company millions of dollars and probably years of research. Simple doesn't begin to cover it. As the reality of the situation sank in, Blake's expression sobered. He turned to face Mike fully, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. Mr. Thompson, Mike, I owe you an apology. The way I've treated you, the things I've said, it's inexcusable. Mike held up a hand, uncomfortable with the sudden shift in dynamics. It's fine, Mr. Stevenson. You didn't know. That's just it, Blake interrupted. I didn't know because I never bothered to find out. I made assumptions based on your job, your age. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The sincerity in Blake's voice caught Mike off guard. He'd come to expect mockery and disdain from the younger man, not this raw honesty. I appreciate that, Mike said softly. Thank you. An awkward silence fell between them, both men unsure how to navigate this new territory. Finally, Blake cleared his throat. So what happens now, huh? Mike raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, you can't go back to being a janitor after this. Your skills, your knowledge, we need you on the engineering team. Hell, you should be leading it. Mike's heart raced at the prospect. To return to engineering, to use his mind instead of just his hands, it was everything he'd dreamed of for years. But doubt crept in, tempering his excitement. I don't know, Mr. Stevenson. It's been a long time since I've worked as an engineer. The field has changed so much. Blake waved off his concerns. You just revolutionized our flagship product overnight. I'd say you're more than qualified. He paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. Unless you prefer mopping floors. Mike couldn't help but chuckle. I can't say I'll miss the smell of industrial cleaner. Then it's settled, Blake said, clapping Mike on the shoulder. Welcome to the team, Chief Engineer Thompson. As they shook hands, sealing the unexpected deal, neither man noticed the figure watching them through the lab's glass walls. Samantha Chen, Tech Innovate's ambitious VP of Operations, had arrived early to check on the troubled project. What she'd witnessed left her both impressed and uneasy. Sam had been gunning for Blake's job for months, carefully documenting his missteps and building a case for the board. This miraculous turnaround threatened to derail all her plans. As she watched Blake and Mike leave the lab, chatting like old friends, her mind raced with possibilities. If she could find a way to take credit for Mike's discovery, or better yet, discredit him entirely, she might still have a shot at the top spot. All she needed was leverage, something to use against the newcomer. Sam pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the keys as she composed an email. Time for a little background check on our mysterious Mr. Thompson, she muttered. Meanwhile, Mike and Blake had made their way to the CEO's office. Blake poured them each a cup of coffee, real coffee, not the watered-down stuff from the break room, and settled into his chair. So, Mike, he began, tell me more about your background. How does a brilliant engineer end up as a janitor? Mike sipped his coffee, savoring the rich flavor as he gathered his thoughts. It's a long story, he warned. Blake leaned back, gesturing expansively. We've got time. The board meeting isn't until this afternoon, and something tells me they're going to be very interested in hearing about our new chief engineer. Mike nodded, taking a deep breath. Well, it all started about 5 years ago. I was working for Quantum Cool, one of the leading firms in thermal management systems. As Mike recounted his fall from grace, the economic downturn, the layoffs, the struggle to find work in an industry that valued youth over experience, Blake listened intently. The CEO's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally a grim understanding. That's why I never spoke up, Mike concluded. After so many rejections, so many doors slammed in my face, I guess I just gave up. Figured it was better to have a job, any job, than to keep chasing a dream that seemed out of reach. Blake shook his head, a mix of admiration and frustration in his voice. I can't imagine how tough that must have been. But Mike, you've got to know, your skills, your experience, they're invaluable. Any company would be lucky to have you. Maybe, Mike said with a wry smile, but not many CEOs would take the time to listen to the janitor's crazy ideas. Blake winced at the reminder of his past behavior. Well, this CEO has learned his lesson. From now on, I want to hear everyone's ideas, no matter what their job title is. In fact, he trailed off, lost in thought for a moment. Then his eyes lit up with that spark that all great innovators share. Mike, I think you've just inspired our next big initiative. We're going to create a program that taps into the hidden talents of all our employees. Who knows how many other geniuses we have mopping floors or answering phones? Mike raised an eyebrow. That's a big change. Are you sure the board will go for it? Blake grinned, a hint of his old cockiness returning. Leave the board to me. Once they see what you've done with the cooling system, they'll be putty in my hands. Speaking of which, we should probably get you cleaned up before the meeting. Can't have our new chief engineer smelling like motor oil and looking like he's been up all night. Mike glanced down at his stained uniform and chuckled. Good point. I don't suppose you have a spare suit lying around. As a matter of fact, Blake said, standing up and moving to a closet in the corner of his office. I always keep a few extras on hand. Never know when you might need to impress an investor or clean up after a lunchtime mishap. He pulled out a sleek charcoal suit and handed it to Mike. This should fit you. There's a shower in the executive washroom down the hall. Go get yourself presentable, and I'll have my assistant rustle up some breakfast. We've got a big day ahead of us. As Mike headed for the door, Blake called after him. Oh, and Mike, thank you. Not just for fixing the prototype, but for reminding me what real leadership looks like. Mike paused, touched by the sincerity in Blake's voice. He turned back with a smile. Thank you for giving me a chance. Not many would have. As the door closed behind Mike, Blake sank back into his chair, mind racing with possibilities. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of a whole new era for Tech Innovate. And for himself. What neither man realized was that their late-night breakthrough had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of the tech industry. As Mike showered away years of doubt and resentment, and Blake plotted a revolutionary new course for his company, forces were already aligning against them. In her office, Sam Chen hung up the phone, a triumphant smile on her face. Got you, she whispered, staring at the file on her computer screen. The truth about Mike Thompson was far more complex and potentially explosive than anyone could have imagined. The stage was set for a showdown that would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and redefine what it means to be successful in the cutthroat world of tech. And at the center of it all, an unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of innovation and second chances. Blake glanced at his watch and reached for the intercom. Janet, is Mr. Thompson ready? The board will be here any minute. He's on his way, sir, his assistant replied. And sir, you might want to see this email I just received. It's from Ms. Chen, sir. She says it's about Mr. Thompson's background. She claims it's urgent. Blake's jaw clenched. He'd always found Sam's ambition admirable, if sometimes grating. But this felt like a step too far. Tell her I'll deal with it after the board meeting. And Janet, not a word of this to anyone, especially Mike. Yes, sir, Janet replied, her tone neutral. As if on cue, Mike walked in, looking transformed in the tailored suit. Gone was the stooped posture and hesitant demeanor of the janitor. In his place stood a confident professional, ready to take on the world. Blake pushed aside his concerns about Sam's email, forcing a smile. Looking sharp, Chief Engineer. Ready to blow some minds? Mike nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness on his face. As I'll ever be. It's been a while since I've presented to a board. Just remember, you're the expert here. They need you more than you need them. As they made their way to the boardroom, Blake couldn't shake a sense of unease. What had Sam uncovered? And more importantly, why was she so eager to share it now? The boardroom fell silent as Blake and Mike entered. A dozen pairs of eyes locked onto them, a mix of curiosity and skepticism evident in their gazes. Ladies and gentlemen, Blake began, his voice commanding attention. "I know we're here to discuss the cooling system crisis. But before we dive into that, I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Mike Thompson, our new chief engineer." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Harold Winters, the board's eldest member, spoke up. "Chief engineer, I wasn't aware we were hiring for that position." Blake smiled. "We weren't. But sometimes opportunity knocks in unexpected ways. Mike, why don't you tell them what you told me?" For the next hour, Mike held the board spellbound. He walked them through the problems with the original design, his innovative solution, and the staggering efficiency improvements they'd achieved overnight. As he spoke, Blake watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to interest to outright amazement. When Mike finished his presentation, the room erupted in applause. Even Harold, known for his hard-to-please nature, looked impressed. "This is remarkable," said Sarah Ling, head of R&D. "Mr. Thompson, where did you come from? How did we miss someone with your expertise?" Mike hesitated, glancing at Blake. The CEO nodded encouragingly. "Well," Mike began, "until yesterday, I was working as a janitor here at Tech Innovate." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged shocked glances, some looking to Blake for confirmation. Blake stepped forward. "It's true, and it's made me realize we've been overlooking an incredible resource, the hidden talents of our entire workforce. That's why I'm proposing a new initiative." As Blake outlined his plan for a company-wide talent discovery program, he could see the board members warming to the idea. By the time he finished, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the room. Harold cleared his throat. "I must say, Blake, I had my doubts when this meeting was called. But this could be a game changer, not just for our cooling systems, but for the entire company culture." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Blake allowed himself a moment of triumph. They'd done it. Mike's breakthrough, combined with the new initiative, had not only saved the company from disaster, but positioned them for unprecedented growth. As the meeting adjourned, board members crowded around Mike, eager to pick his brain. Blake hung back, basking in the success of the presentation. But his satisfaction was short-lived. Sam Chen appeared at his elbow, her face a mask of professional concern. "Blake, do you have a moment? There's something you need to see." Blake's gut tightened. He'd almost forgotten about Sam's mysterious email in the excitement of the presentation. "Can it wait, Sam? We should be celebrating." Sam's eyes flicked to Mike, then back to Blake. "I really think you'll want to see this now. It's about Mr. Thompson's past." Reluctantly, Blake followed Sam to a quiet corner of the room. She handed him a tablet, open to a news article from 5 years ago. As Blake read, his face paled. "This can't be right," he muttered. Sam leaned in, her voice low. "I've triple-checked the sources. It's all true. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Blake looked up, his mind racing. Across the room, he could see Mike chatting animatedly with Sarah Ling, his face alight with the joy of being back in his element. How could he reconcile that image with the information now burning a hole in his brain? "We do nothing," Blake said, firmly handing the tablet back to Sam. "At least for now. I need time to process this and figure out the best way forward." Sam's eyes widened in surprise. "But Blake, if this gets out—" "It won't," Blake cut her off. "Not unless someone in this room leaks it, and I trust that won't happen." He fixed Sam with a pointed stare. She held his gaze for a moment before nodding. "Of course not. I'm just looking out for the company's interest." "I appreciate that, Sam. But right now, Mike's innovation has saved this company millions. Let's focus on that win." As Sam walked away, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a precipice. The exhilaration of the morning's success battled with the dread of what he just learned. He made his way back to Mike, plastering on a smile. "Well, Chief Engineer, I'd say that was a rousing success. How about we grab some lunch and discuss next steps?" Mike beamed, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Sounds great. I can't tell you how good it feels to be doing this again. It's like coming home." Blake's smile faltered for just a moment. "Yeah, home," he echoed, leading Mike out of the boardroom. As they walked, Blake's mind raced. How much did Mike know? How much should he reveal? And most importantly, what would this mean for the future of Tech Innovate? The elevator doors closed behind them, carrying them down to the lobby. As they descended, Blake made a decision. He needed more information before he could act. And there was only one person who could give him the full story. "Change of plans," Blake said as they reached the ground floor. "How about we grab some takeout and head back to my office? There's something I'd like to discuss in private." Mike raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, sounds good." As they walked out into the bright afternoon sun, neither man aware of the seismic shifts occurring beneath their feet. The truth, when it finally came out, would test the limits of their newfound trust and force them both to confront hard questions about loyalty, redemption, and the true cost of success. Back in her office, Sam Chen stared at her computer screen, finger hovering over the send button. The email, addressed to every major tech blog and news outlet, contained the explosive information about Mike's past. She took a deep breath, weighing her options. With a decisive click, she made her choice. For better or worse, the wheels were now in motion. In the busy street below, Mike turned to Blake, a look of concern crossing his face. "Is everything okay? You seem distracted." Blake forced a smile. "Just thinking about all the changes ahead. Big things are coming, Mike. Big things." As they waited for their food, Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line made his blood run cold. "Breaking news. Tech Innovate's new chief engineer harbors dark secret." Blake glanced at Mike, laughing at something the cashier had said. In that moment, he realized the true test of leadership was just beginning. "Mike," he said, his voice tight, "I think we need to talk." Mike's laughter faded as he caught the serious tone in Blake's voice. "What's wrong?" Blake glanced around the crowded restaurant, acutely aware of the potential for eavesdroppers. "Not here. Let's get our food and head back to the office." The walk back to Tech Innovate was tense, filled with uncomfortable silence. Mike could sense something was off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what had changed in the last hour. As they entered Blake's office, the CEO's phone buzzed incessantly. He ignored it, setting their takeout on the coffee table and gesturing for Mike to take a seat on the couch. "Mike," Blake began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything in your past that could potentially complicate things for us?" Mike's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Blake took a deep breath. "I received some information about your time at Quantum Cool. Something about a lawsuit? Industrial espionage?" The color drained from Mike's face. He set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. "How did you find out about that?" "So it's true," Blake pressed. Mike ran a hand through his hair, his earlier confidence evaporating. "It's complicated. I was accused of stealing trade secrets, but it wasn't what it looked like. I was set up." Blake leaned forward, his food forgotten. "I'm listening." Mike took a shaky breath. "It was my last year at Quantum Cool. I'd been working on a breakthrough cooling system, something that could have revolutionized the industry. But my direct supervisor, Jack Reeves, he was jealous, felt threatened by my success." Mike's eyes took on a distant look as he recalled the painful memories. "One night, I was working late. Jack came in, acting friendly for once, offered me a drink. Next thing I knew, I was waking up at my desk the next morning with company files copied to my personal drive and emails sent from my account to our biggest competitor." Blake's eyes widened. "You were framed." Mike nodded, "but I had no way to prove it. It was my word against Jack's, and he had all the evidence on his side. The company pressed charges. I lost everything: my job, my reputation, my savings fighting the legal battle." "But you were innocent," Blake said, a note of anger creeping into his voice. "The courts didn't see it that way. In the end, I took a plea deal. It was that or risk years in prison." Mike's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I was afraid of losing this second chance." Blake stood up and paced the room, his mind racing. "We need to get ahead of this. Someone leaked the story to the press. It's only a matter of time before it breaks." Mike's head snapped up. "What? How?" I don't know, but we'll find out. Blake's jaw set in a determined line. What I do know is that we're not going to let this destroy everything we've built. You're innocent, and we're going to prove it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Janet poked her head in, her face pale. Sir, Miss Chen is here. She says it's urgent. Blake's eyes narrowed. Send her in. Sam strode into the office, her usual confidence somewhat dimmed. She faltered slightly at the sight of Mike. Blake, we need to talk. Privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Mike, Blake said firmly. Sam hesitated, then squared her shoulders. Fine, the story's out. Every major tech blog is running with it. We need to issue a statement, distance ourselves from... No, Blake cut her off. We're not distancing ourselves from anyone. Mike is innocent, and we're going to stand by him. Sam's eyes widened. Blake, be reasonable. The evidence was fabricated, Blake finished. He turned to Mike. You said Jack Reeves set you up, right? Do you have any proof? Mike shook his head. Nothing concrete, but there was a security guard, Hector Ramirez. He saw Jack in the office that night, but he was too afraid to come forward, afraid of losing his job. Blake nodded, a plan forming in his mind. Sam, I want you to find this Hector Ramirez. Offer him whatever it takes to get him to tell the truth. Sam opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. And what will you be doing? A grim smile played at Blake's lips. I'm going to have a little chat with Jack Reeves. As Sam left to carry out her task, Blake turned back to Mike. I know this isn't how you wanted your first day to go, but I need you to trust me. We're going to fix this. Mike looked up, a mix of gratitude and disbelief on his face. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Blake sat down next to Mike, his voice sincere. Because in the few hours I've known the real you, you've shown me more integrity and brilliance than most people I've worked with for years. You've reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. To innovate, to make a difference. I'm not going to let a lie take that away from either of us. For the first time since the conversation began, Mike allowed himself a small smile. Thank you, Blake. I don't know what to say. Don't thank me yet, Blake said, standing up. We've got a lot of work to do. First things first, we need to craft a statement. Something that shows we're standing by you without outright accusing Quantum Cool of wrongdoing. Not yet, anyway. As they worked on the statement, Blake's phone rang. It was Sam. You're on speaker, Blake said. What have you found? I tracked down Hector Ramirez. Sam's voice came through, tinged with excitement. He's willing to talk, but he wants protection. Says he's been sitting on some information that could blow this whole thing wide open. Blake and Mike exchanged looks of cautious optimism. Get him in here, Blake said. And Sam, good work. After hanging up, Blake turned to Mike. Okay, while we wait for Hector, I need you to tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small. As Mike recounted the events leading up to his framing, Blake took meticulous notes. With each new piece of information, a clearer picture began to emerge. Not just of Mike's innocence, but of a larger conspiracy within Quantum Cool. Hours passed in a flurry of activity. Sam returned with Hector, whose testimony corroborated Mike's story and added crucial details. Blake's legal team worked tirelessly, building a case that would not only exonerate Mike, but potentially bring down those truly responsible. As night fell, Blake stood at his office window, looking out over the city. Behind him, Mike sat surrounded by laptops and stacks of papers, working on refining his cooling system design. You know, Blake said, breaking the comfortable silence, when I woke up yesterday, I never could have imagined any of this. Mike looked up from his work. Having second thoughts? Blake turned, a wry smile on his face. About you? Not for a second. About the insanity we're about to unleash on the tech world? Maybe a little. Mike chuckled. It's not too late to back out. I'd understand. Not a chance, Blake said firmly. We're in this together now. Besides, I haven't had this much fun in years. As if on cue, Blake's phone buzzed with a message from Sam. He read it, his eyebrows shooting up. What is it? Mike asked. Blake looked up, a mix of shock and triumph on his face. Sam just heard back from her contact at Quantum Cool. Apparently, Jack Reeves has been embezzling funds for years. The company's launching an internal investigation. Mike sat back, stunned. So this could actually work? We could clear my name? It's looking more likely by the minute, Blake confirmed. But we're not out of the woods yet. Tomorrow's press conference will be crucial. As they resumed their work, both men felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, Mike felt hope, and Blake, watching his new friend and colleague work with passionate intensity, knew he'd made the right choice. Little did they know, the press conference would bring revelations that would shake the very foundations of the tech industry, forcing everyone involved to confront hard truths about ambition, loyalty, and the true meaning of innovation. As the first light of dawn crept into the office, Blake stood up, stretching. We should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Mike nodded, stifling a yawn. Blake, he said as they headed for the door, whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for believing in me. Blake clapped him on the shoulder. Thank me when this is all over, and you're leading our R&D department to new heights. As they left the office, both men felt the weight of the coming day, but there was also a sense of excitement, of standing on the brink of something momentous. The elevator doors closed, carrying them down to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. As the elevator descended, Blake's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Harold from the board. I should take this. Mike nodded, stepping out of the elevator. I'll wait for you in the lobby. Blake answered the call, his voice echoing in the empty elevator. Harold, it's late. What's going on? Mike couldn't make out Harold's words, but Blake's responses painted a clear picture. Yes, I'm aware of the situation. No, we're not cutting Mike loose. Because he's innocent, Harold. We have proof. Trust me, this is going to work out in our favor. Yes, I'll see you at the press conference. Blake emerged from the elevator, looking weary but determined. The board's nervous, he explained. Can't say I blame them. Mike's shoulders slumped. Maybe this is a mistake. I don't want to bring down the company you've worked so hard to build. Blake shook his head firmly. Not a chance. We're seeing this through. Now let's get some rest. We've got a big day ahead of us. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Tech Innovate's headquarters. Mike and Blake arrived early, huddling with the PR team to go over last-minute details for the press conference. As they worked, Sam burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. You're not going to believe this, she said, brandishing her tablet. Quantum Cool stock is in free fall. Rumors of widespread corruption are spreading like wildfire. Blake took the tablet, scanning the headlines. His eyebrows shot up. This changes everything. We need to adjust our strategy. For the next hour, they reworked their plan, adapting to the rapidly evolving situation. As the time for the press conference approached, Mike felt a mix of nervousness and determination settling in his stomach. Blake noticed his unease. You okay? Mike nodded. Just wondering how we got here. Yesterday I was mopping floors and now you're about to change the tech industry forever, Blake finished with a grin. Ready. As I'll ever be, Mike replied. They stepped into the packed conference room, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. Blake raised his hands, calling for quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming, he began. I know there have been a lot of rumors and speculation about recent events at Tech Innovate. I'm here to set the record straight. He gestured to Mike. This is Mike Thompson, our new chief engineer. Some of you may have heard stories about his past. I'm here to tell you that those stories are based on lies and deception. A murmur ran through the crowd. Blake pressed on. For years, Mike was the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by his former employers at Quantum Cool. Today, we're not just clearing his name. We're exposing a pattern of corruption that goes to the very top of one of the tech industry's giants. As Blake laid out the evidence they'd gathered, including Hector Ramirez's testimony and the financial irregularities at Quantum Cool, the room erupted in a frenzy of questions and exclamations. Mike stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady despite his nerves. I've spent years living under the shadow of false accusations. Today, I'm reclaiming my reputation and my future. And I'm proud to do it alongside the incredible team at Tech Innovate. He went on to explain the breakthrough cooling system he developed, highlighting how it would revolutionize data center efficiency and reduce environmental impact. As the press conference wound down, Blake made a final announcement. In light of recent events, Tech Innovate is launching a new initiative. We're creating a fund to support whistleblowers and victims of corporate wrongdoing in the tech industry. It's time we held ourselves to a higher standard. The room erupted in applause. As they left the stage, Blake turned to Mike with a grin. "I'd say that went well." Mike laughed, the tension of the past 24 hours finally easing. "You could say that. What now, Now?" Blake's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Now we get to work. We've got a company to run and an industry to change." Over the next few weeks, the tech world was turned upside down. Quantum Cool's stock continued to plummet as more evidence of wrongdoing came to light. Jack Reeves and several other executives were arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Tech Innovate, meanwhile, soared to new heights. Mike's cooling system proved to be even more revolutionary than anticipated, attracting interest from major players in the tech industry. The company's commitment to ethical practices and innovation set a new standard, inspiring others to follow suit. One afternoon, as Mike and Blake were reviewing plans for a new research facility, Sam knocked on the office door. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing Blake a tablet. On the screen was an article from a major tech publication. The headline read, "Tech Innovate's Mike Thompson named Innovator of the Year, a redemption story for the ages." Blake looked up with a smile. "Congratulations, Mike. You deserve it." Mike shook his head, still amazed by the turn his life had taken. "I couldn't have done it without you, both of you," he added, nodding to Sam. Sam smiled, a hint of her old ambition glinting in her eyes. "Don't get too comfortable. I've got my sights set on that award for next year." They all laughed, the sound of friendship and shared purpose filling the room. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow through the office windows, Mike found himself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past month. From janitor to chief engineer, from pariah to celebrated innovator. It was almost too much to believe. Blake's voice broke through his reverie. "Earth to Mike, where'd you go?" Mike smiled. "Just thinking about how different things were a month ago. I never thought I'd get a second chance like this." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life has a funny way of surprising us. The question is, what do we do with those surprises? "We make the most of them," Mike said firmly, "and we help others do the same." As they turned back to their work, both men felt a sense of purpose and possibility. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But together, they were ready to face whatever came next. In the world of tech, where fortunes can change in an instant and today's innovation is tomorrow's old news, Mike and Blake had found something rare and valuable, a partnership built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for a better future. As night fell over Tech Innovate, the lights in Blake's office remained on, a beacon of innovation and second chances in a city full of dreams. The story of Mike Thompson and Blake Stevenson was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the tumultuous press conference that had changed everything. Tech Innovate had not only weathered the storm, but emerged stronger than ever. Mike's cooling system was now the industry standard, and the company's ethical practices had inspired a wave of reform across the tech sector. On a crisp autumn morning, Mike stood at the window of his new office, sipping coffee and watching the city come to life. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Blake entered, a mischievous grin on his face. "Ready for your big day, Chief?" Mike chuckled. "As ready as I'll ever be. Still can't believe you're making me do this." "Hey, it was your idea," Blake reminded him. "The Hidden Talents program wouldn't exist without you. Who better to kick it off?" The Hidden Talents initiative had grown out of Mike's own experience. It encouraged employees at all levels to share their skills and ideas, regardless of their current position. Today marked the launch of the program, with Mike slated to give the keynote speech. As they made their way to the auditorium, Mike couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The same halls he once mopped were now filled with excited chatter about his latest innovations. Employees who once ignored him now stopped to shake his hand or ask for advice. The auditorium was packed, a sea of faces both familiar and new. As Mike took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady, "I stood in this very building with a mop in my hand, believing my dreams were behind me. Today I stand before you as proof that it's never too late for a second chance." As Mike shared his story and outlined the vision for the Hidden Talents program, he could see the impact his words were having. Eyes lit up with possibility, and he could almost feel the energy in the room shifting. "So I challenge each of you," he concluded, "to look beyond titles and appearances. The next great idea could come from anywhere: the mailroom, the cafeteria, or yes, even the janitorial staff. Let's create a culture where everyone's voice is heard and every talent is valued." The applause was thunderous. As Mike left the stage, he was mobbed by enthusiastic employees, each eager to share their own hidden skills and ideas. Blake appeared at his side, beaming with pride. "I'd say that was a success. Ready for phase 2? Mike raised an eyebrow. "Phase 2? Blake's grin widened. "Did you really think we'd limit this to just Tech Innovate? We're taking the show on the road, my friend. It's time to shake up the entire industry." Over the next few months, Mike and Blake crisscrossed the country, speaking at tech conferences and visiting other companies. Their message of ethical innovation and untapped potential resonated deeply, sparking a movement that transcended corporate boundaries. But their success also brought new challenges. Competitors, threatened by Tech Innovate's rise, launched smear campaigns questioning Mike's past. Old wounds were reopened, and Mike found himself once again defending his reputation. One particularly grueling day, after a hostile interview with a skeptical journalist, Mike slumped in his hotel room, doubt creeping in. A knock at the door roused him. "You decent?" Blake's voice called. "Define decent," Mike replied wryly. Blake entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He took one look at Mike's face and sighed. "Rough day, huh?" Mike nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Maybe I should just focus on engineering and leave the public stuff to you." Blake sat down, his expression serious. "Mike, do you remember what you told me the day we launched the Hidden Talents program about voices being heard?" "Yeah, of course." "Well, your voice matters too. Your story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's inspiring people. It's changing lives." Blake leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I know it's tough, but we're making a real difference here, and I couldn't do it without you." Mike felt a surge of gratitude for his friend and partner. "Thanks, Blake. I needed that." Blake grinned, lightening the mood. "Anytime. Now, how about we order some ridiculously overpriced room service and strategize our next move?" As they brainstormed late into the night, Mike felt his passion and purpose reigniting. They were on the cusp of something truly revolutionary, and he was determined to see it through. Weeks turned into months, and the Hidden Talents movement gained unstoppable momentum. Companies across the tech industry and beyond began implementing similar programs, unleashing waves of innovation and creativity. But perhaps the most significant change was happening within Tech Innovate itself. The company culture had transformed, becoming a model of collaboration and inclusivity. Employees at all levels felt empowered to contribute, leading to a surge in patents and breakthrough technologies. On the anniversary of Mike's promotion to chief engineer, Blake called an all-hands meeting. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as he took the stage. "A year ago," Blake began, echoing Mike's words from months before, "we embarked on a journey to revolutionize not just our company, but our entire industry. Today I'm proud to announce the next step in that journey." He paused for effect, building the suspense. Tech Innovate is launching the Innovation for All Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to bringing STEM education and opportunities to underserved communities. The room erupted in cheers. Blake raised his hands for quiet. "And to lead this initiative, I can think of no one better than the man who inspired it all. Please welcome the new executive director of the Innovation for All Foundation, Mike Thompson." Mike stood frozen for a moment, shock written across his face. As the applause washed over him, he made his way to the stage in a daze. I don't know what to say," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, I was invisible. Today, thanks to all of you, I have the chance to help others become seen." As Mike outlined his vision for the foundation, he could see tears in the eyes of many in the audience. The impact of their journey was written on every face. After the meeting, as Mike and Blake stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city, a comfortable silence fell between them. "You know," Mike said finally, "when I took that janitor job, I thought I was at the end of my story. Turns out, it was just the beginning." Blake nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Life's funny that way. You never know where the next big idea will come from." "Or the next great friendship," Mike added, raising his coffee cup in a toast. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow on the Tech Innovate building, both men felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. They had changed the face of an industry, transformed countless lives, and forged a partnership that defied all odds. But more than that, they had created a legacy of innovation, inclusivity, and second chances that would outlast them both. In a world often driven by profit and prestige, they had proven that true success comes from valuing every voice and nurturing every talent. As night fell and the city lights twinkled to life, Mike and Blake turned back to their office, ready to tackle whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. They knew that their journey was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. The story of the janitor and the CEO had become legend in the tech world, a testament to the power of seeing potential where others saw only limitations. And as they stepped back into the building that had been the stage for their unlikely partnership, both men knew that their greatest innovations were still to come. For in the end, it wasn't about titles or positions. It wasn't even about the groundbreaking technologies they'd created. It was about the lives they'd touched, the culture they'd changed, and the future they'd helped to shape, one hidden talent at a time. As the elevator doors closed behind them, carrying them back to their shared office, Mike turned to Blake with a grin. "So what's next?" Blake's eyes twinkled with the promise of new adventures. "I don't know, my friend, but I can't wait to find out." And with that, they stepped out into the future they had built together, ready for whatever surprises lay ahead.